I just want to say, like, this is actually one of the things that we've learned building DataCamp is that so many people do not learn because they think they can do it. And
Mm.
so a huge part of our focus has been, let's make it really kind of approachable and easy and engaging and fun to learn. Because to some extent, like, people's blockers are kind of mental blockers where
Yeah,
they just think
definitely.
it's not for them, think they can't do it. And the reality is, like, most people can do it. And it's about just believing in yourself and getting it done.
Oh, I love that.
No, but that's really it's a huge part of, I think, what makes a good training program and effective education is helping people to get to the other side of that.
To welcome everyone to our first ever podcast with Technical Founder. And today we have an interesting guest that I'm excited to present to you guys. And he's the founder of DataCamp, Jonathan Cornelissen. And DataCamp, if you guys don't know it already, DataCamp is one of the largest educational platforms in data and AI, with over 14 million users and 500 courses, which is quite impressive. So we're super excited to have Jonathan today here. And yeah, let's welcome him.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this as well.
Awesome. Thank you for joining. I know when we first talked, I think it was a month ago, I wasn't sure. I reached out to you on LinkedIn. I thought you would be busy and wouldn't respond. So the moment you responded, I was like, oh my goodness, let's make it happen. So thank you for coming in today.
No, so happy to be here.
So, why don't we go ahead and dive in? So, Jonathan, why don't you tell us about your background? Where are you from originally?
Yeah, so today I live in New York City, but I grew up in Belgium, in a small village near a university town called Leuven. Um, and Yeah, I love being in the US, but I still cherish those Belgian roots as well. We have part of the company in Belgium, so I get the opportunity to go back quite a bit on a regular basis.
That's awesome. And is DataCamp global? Do you have offices beyond Belgium and New York?
Um, yes, I would say our client base is very international. If you look at individuals that come to DataCamp to learn, it's really from every country in the world. Um, uh, yeah, all the way from the U.S., North America, Europe to Latin and APAC. And we're investing quite a bit in localization as well. So I expect um, our growth to be even larger in the future outside of the US and Europe. And then we also help organizations upskill and reskill, and there the client base skews a little bit more towards the US and Europe.
So, how many people do you think work now currently?
Um, Full time, it's around 200 to 220, depending on whether you count the contractors or not. Yeah.
Wow, that is kind of impressive because the amount of users that you guys support with only 200 people, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the magic of technology, and it's been a huge focus of ours to really scale what we're doing to as many
Interesting.
people as possible.
And I'm sure AI is a big part of it.
Yes, more and more.
Yes, I'm excited to dive into those topics. But first, we really want to get to know you as a person. So, because I think that defines the company a lot as well. So, tell us more about how you got interested in data in the beginning and how it formed the creation of DataCamp.
Yeah, so that was actually fairly late. So when I grew up, I I was very interested in create the creative things, right? Like music and creating movies and as a teenager, my dream job was kind of, I wanted to be a movie director. And to some
Interesting.
some extent, I still think that should be an incredibly fun job. Um, and ultimately, I did end up studying economics and business. And so I chose a different path, kind of at university. Um, and I was really interested in economics and business, but there's a lot of fluffiness in a lot of the courses, and so by the end of that master's, I wanted to do something more technical, and so I did a very technical PhD in financial econometrics, and during that time, I got active into the R community, and that was one of the sparks. But it was really, so I only discovered what people call data science today, essentially as I was studying business, and I felt I was looking for the less fluffy sides of business. There, at the time, there was a major called business engineering, business research, and today that's called data science, actually. So I kind of chose the data science track before it existed,
Oh
and
wow.
that kind of sparked my interest in this whole space, and I really fell in love with statistics and the whole kind of data analytics space.
Interesting. It's I think I resonated with you a lot when we first discussed your background in business because I had the same similar story. I did business administration as a bachelor's, and as you said, the fluffiness, I think it's a perfect word to describe it because every time we had classes, we sort of never really relied on data at all. It sort of mostly was about storytelling and marketing.
Yeah,
So I felt the same need to ground myself in hard skills. But
yeah.
I'm curious, like when you said you joined the art community and you had this class, the business research, what was the stack like? What were the main topics back then?
Oh, it was so. It's I'm dating myself, but this is about 15 to 20 years ago. I was looking earlier on LinkedIn. I was like, oh God, I'm getting old. So at the time, the standard was SAS, SPSS. There was a lot of proprietary software
Mm,
that people used to do data analysis and data science. Um, and it was the start of open source kind of starting to take over. So R at the time was growing exponentially,
mm,
and it was the expectation, at least in the kind of research area that I was part of, was, oh, R is going to kind of take over and push SAS and SPSS and Stata and some of these other proprietary tools. It's going to push them to the side. And that happened to some extent, but then Python came along. Long story short, and so I got kind of introduced to R in the context of my PhD, having to analyze like large quantities of high frequency financial data.
mm,
And I started building an R package just to help myself, but also other people. How do you work with high frequency financial data, which at the time
mm,
was a challenge. There's still all types of challenges and opportunities when working with high frequency financial data. Um, and anyway, so like I saw how fast R was growing. It was truly the exponential growth phase, um, and and I also felt like there was there were a lot of really smart people in the art community at the time, but most of them were focused on solving the hard technical problems, and
mhm.
very few people were focused on making it easier for people to learn R, making it easier to use R, making it easier for people to join the R community and really understand what it's all about. Um, and that was one of the sparks to start DataCamp because having come from a less technical background, I felt like, hey, there's so much potential here, but it needs to be easier for people to learn these technical tools and technical skills, and apply them in real world situations.
Interesting. I actually never knew that you were into high frequency trading too. So I think it makes sense because it lies in the intersection of finance from business world and combines the data science part of it, especially the algorithm development for those. I know it's my CTO is actually used to work as a high frequency trader. I mean, algorithm developer. So
Yeah,
he learned a
yeah.
lot from there. I think it's the fastest way to like learn different types of algorithms. But yeah, but you mentioned you studied econometrics. So were you what was your thesis on?
So my PhD thesis was focused on two different areas. The primary piece was how can you use high frequency financial data to get better risk estimates,
Mm.
and risk measurements, and then how can you use that to have better ultimately portfolio performance, because once you take into account every single transaction that happens with a stock during the day, it's an enormous amount of information. So you actually can get better risk measurements, but you run into all types of problems. Like if news hits the market, you get kind of disjoint changes in the stock price, and you want to kind of, those have different predictive value than the smoother variations in the stock price. Um, so things like that was what I spent 3 years of my life researching, and it was intellectually really stimulating, really interesting. But ultimately, I kind of, however passionate I was about education, I didn't really fit the academic world. So fairly quickly, I realized I should get out and um, either go work for another business or start my own business.
Mm, interesting. And I was going to ask, since you came from a non-technical background, how did you even pick up all those terms that are necessary to master data science, like statistics and math for it? And was it hard for you to just like do it on by yourself, or did you rely on the community, or what was your strategy?
It was a combination. So on the one hand, our university had some really helpful uh, professors and courses, and I felt like um, I was definitely well supported during my PhD. At the same time, I was surrounded by people who tended to be really technical in their own backgrounds, so math, physics, computer science, and so I definitely had to catch up compared to my peers, and that was
Mm.
painful. And that was actually one of the inspirations to start DataCamp, to make it easier for people with a less technical background to learn these skills. It partially came from just the struggle I went through myself, and especially in those days, a lot of the tooling around R was not great. A lot of the documentation um, was kind of being built out. Let's put it that way. And so that all of that has improved quite a lot. Um, but uh, but yeah, it was essentially the spark to start DataCamp, um, because it was a painful experience for myself, and I ended up doing a lot of teaching around statistics and R to business students, and and I was looking to give them something like I was looking for a platform I could send them to rather than just relying on the workshops I was doing myself. And at the time, you had Code Academy and Code School that had a very
Mm.
innovative didactical approach, but it was all about web development, all about learning how to code. And so our insight was, well, that's great, right? Like amazing didactical experiences, but there's so many people that work with data on a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis, and they need some of these skills as well. They don't need to learn JavaScript per se, but maybe they need to learn SQL, Python, R, and so on and so on. And so that was kind of the opportunity we saw. Initially, I was just looking for somebody else to build a platform like that, and when we noticed nobody did, we felt like, okay, this is going to be a huge opportunity. Um,
Interesting. Oh wow. I think I saw on your LinkedIn that you were a tutor or an instructor as well. And I was like, this is so awesome that you build a platform for instructors too. And because you were the instructor yourself, and I guess it gave you that edge when creating an educational platform.
yeah, yeah. So during my studies, I did a lot of tutoring, and my co-founder Martin and myself, we actually we started a nonprofit focused on matching tutors with students in need of tutoring through a simple online platform. That was actually, like, it was a nonprofit, but it's sort of the first business we started. in hindsight, that could have been a real business. Um, but at the time, we felt like, hey, maybe this is just a local opportunity, and
Mhm.
we felt like if we started as a nonprofit, then we can have students kind of run the show, and it can be a way for them to learn how to run and build a business. Um, and that went well. It did well for several years, and then eventually, um, it it did achieve its objective of kind of changing the market around tutoring in our local university town. Um, but the hard lesson is, like, if you work with volunteers, it's hard to keep things going in the long run.
I feel like I'm going through just the exact steps that you did because I'm facing the same thing. We're running our own workshops, we're working with volunteers, and it also started as a nonprofit. And I realized it's just if you want reliable results, you need to build a company.
Yeah, like, there's a place for nonprofits. Don't get me wrong. I have a lot of respect for people who build nonprofits, and there's a tremendous amount of value you can create through nonprofit entities. The reality is that, like, it is so much harder to kind of succeed in the long run, if you have to always rely on
Mm.
kind of donations and outside funding. And so I think you can actually often achieve the mission even more successful if there is some kind of profits incentive and long term economic incentive.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, it
Not
actually.
in every case, but in a lot of I think in the case of education, I feel pretty strongly that, like, long term impact does require typically some sort of um, profit incentives and sustainability.
Yeah, now that you say that, I just remembered the case with women in tech. I think the community that also was around for more than a decade. And just recently, I mean, this year, they had to close just because of the same issue. They couldn't find a sustainable way to continue. So that was kind of sad, but yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Even some of the most successful ones in education, like Khan Academy, I think they still a huge portion of their time and effort goes to raising money and getting donations. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's an incredible nonprofit. Don't get me wrong, but part of me thinks, like, if some of that energy would actually, like, go towards building the education out more, like, that would be even better.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, so I just remembered an interesting subject about how maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm really curious to know. Back in the day, for instance, we all relied on like PhD and master degrees to get proficiency in data science and get a job. But over the last few years, and especially recently with the advancement of AI, it almost feels like it would be redundant, to say the least, to get into the debt of $200,000 at least, and then try to get a job because we do have a lot of people in our community and Break Into Data that are in their last year of masters and PhDs, and they do struggle. Especially, I think the job market recently is also tough. But outside that, it's still not the guarantee that you'll get a job. So I was curious how DataCamp, you think, impacted that trend of maybe not relying on formal education, but rather just building projects or just learning this way.
yeah, yeah. So maybe if you zoom out, the first thing I want to say is I do think there is value in all these different modalities of education, whether that's like the traditional university education, boot camps, or online education. I think there's value in kind of all three across the board. Um, However, I think in the data and AI space, it's absolutely not required to have a very expensive traditional education. It's not even required to have gone through a boot camp to be successful to get your
Wow.
first job. It could it could help your chances, but it's definitely not a requirement anymore. And the reason is very simple. The reason is because the need for people with data, AI, and analytics skills is larger than the number of people that graduated with a formal degree in some of these areas, whether that's like a master in analytics or a master in data science. There's just not enough people who have that type of background. And so like companies tend to be fairly open. Now, the other reality is like it is a tougher job market, so you do need to invest much more to stand out. Um, but I think the same thing is still true that there's generally kind of more of a need within organizations for more data talent than there is data talent out there. Um, and so the way DataCamp positions ourselves in that space is we very much focus on building the absolute best in class online education experiences around data and AI, and we want them to be very scalable, so we can offer them at an affordable price, uh, to individuals, but also to organizations, because we're now helping large organizations as well, sometimes 10,000s of people within those companies, and they need scalable solutions, right? It's very hard and very cost ineffective to do kind of live training, in a classroom setting, for that many people. There's a place for it. Don't get me wrong. I think I went through a boot camp actually to learn web development. Um, and I got a ton of value from it. I would highly recommend it. But to your point, it is very expensive. A lot of these traditional educational solutions, or even the boot camps, tend to be very expensive. Um, and yeah, and that means it's not for everyone, and it's not a good ROI per se for anyone either. It really depends.
Yes, that is quite a statement, honestly, because so many people ask me, Mary, do we need to go back to school if I don't have any technical background, or can I just land a job and what do I do for it? But given the fact that you're saying you don't even need a boot camp that usually costs like in tens of thousands of dollars, but your platform, DataCamp's platform, I think it's like $150 a year, which is like almost nothing when you compare to other paths.
Yeah, so it depends on where you are in the world, but in the US, our standard pricing is $300 per person, and then 150 during promotions. Um, and in other parts of the world, we go further down in price. Um, and then for large organizations, it tends to be a little bit higher, more in the $300 to $500 per person range. But that's still very, very affordable if you compare that with, say,
Definitely.
5 to 25,000 for a lot of boot camps, or if you're in the US, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a master's education. And
Yeah,
I'm
it's
from
like
Belgium, so I have this bias where all education is virtually free in Belgium. Um, and so when we started the business, people were like, "Hey, what are you doing? There's no money in education." But different parts of the world have very different dynamics around that, um, and especially I think in the US and the UK, the cost of traditional education has gone absolutely insane. Um, and yeah, I'm just like I said, I'm not saying there's no value. I'm just saying the cost is kind of cost increase is actually at a level that's insanity in my opinion.
right, especially with all the student debt that we're collecting as a country. Even I'm curious what it is in Europe, but I think that Europe has a free education, so yeah, it makes sense when you
It
say.
depends on the country in Europe. Yeah, the UK has is somewhere in between the US and mainland Europe, and then um, in Belgium, I think I paid $500 per year for my
Wow.
university education. Well, the taxpayer obviously had to pay a lot
Right,
more, but
right.
like there's actually almost no friction. And I think they raised it to 700 or 800 per year, and there was literally um, I'm not saying
Right.
riots in the street, but there was a lot of pushback. Um, yeah,
Wow. No, that's amazing. That's why I love Europe. Besides the taxes part, of course, but but it's curious also. Um, so for when you said that, I was curious about the fact that you are in many countries that are not English speakers. And I could imagine how DataCamp is making an impact in that way too, because most of the information, most of the research paper these days, especially in AI and data, is mostly in English and Mandarin. But just taking English side of the world, I think it's still you're making an impact that way because people that do not speak the language do not have access to that education. So, do you think DataCamp is making a social impact that way as well globally?
Yeah, and we're at the start of that journey, I would say. So we earlier this year we launched DataCamp in Spanish. We just launched DataCamp in Portuguese. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting there. And we're heavily investing in offering the entire platform in more languages. So French and German are coming later this year.
Wow.
Italian is coming. We're looking at some of the Asian languages as well, which are a little bit trickier to implement well. But yeah, I think it's important to like our whole mission is kind of around democratizing data and AI education and skills, and so um, it's not just about affordability; it's also about localizing the offering to be consumable by people in different countries with varying degrees of language skills. I actually think Gen AI in general will have a huge positive impact here because it's helped like the quality of machine translation is has gone up already in the last 5 to 10 years. But then in addition to that, some of these chatbots are actually like pretty good in different languages. And that will really help the access and affordability to education in general as well.
Yeah, that's exciting. That is exciting. But I did want to circle back to the beginning of when we talked about your background as a technical founder, since this podcast is about uh, bridging the gap between business and data. I'm really curious to know, how did you leverage your background in just building a business? Do you think you, like, having been immersed into this data field, helped you build and maybe leverage some of the technologies when building your own, or were they not really related? Was it still like different when creating your own platform?
Oh, I think the combination of having a business and a technical background to start dating was extremely helpful.
Hmm.
Um, and y- y- yeah, I think in general, it for like non-technical founders or non-technical folks, um, even having like really basic skills gives you a huge edge. So, for example, I never got to be a great software engineer. I was actually pretty terrible at software engineering, but I could build a prototype and I could understand kind of how the initial architectural decisions that we made, how they would
Hmm.
influence things later on. What type of features would be easy to build versus what type of features would be hard to build, given the type of architecture and the type of setup we decided on. It was our CTO who was actually the one leading the development efforts, but I think the fact that I really could understand the trade-offs, that in
Hmm.
itself was really helpful in the early days. Um, and then having some depth in the data space, I think very at the very beginning, the main way it helped was having an understanding of who great instructors would be, who would be the great instructors, and also having an ability to connect with them.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, looking back, I think that was definitely very helpful having that kind of. Um, uh, uh, I think in general, if anything you're going to do, whether you're starting a business or having some depth in different fields is kind of like a superpower, right?
Hmm.
So if you're working in a certain industry and you have a, a reasonable depth in terms of your data skills, that's really a superpower because there's very few people who have that combination of skills. Um,
Hmm. Interesting. Yes, you mentioned you had a CTO and a COO. So, who was the founding team in the beginning of DataCamp?
yeah, we started with 3 people: Martin, Dieter, and myself. Um, Martin was the most kind of commercially focused co-founder, who he has had different roles, and in the early days, his role was really kind of building out the business side of things, so marketing, and getting the word out, acquiring users, and so on and so on. And then our CTO Dieter, he was the one who actually would build the product. And I was kind of sitting in between, focusing sometimes on marketing, sometimes on product and engineering. And in the early days, my primary focus was building a lot of the content and starting to build the model for like high quality course creation. So that was kind of how we got started in the split between the different founders.
Interesting. Yeah, this is pretty cool. I wonder why you don't create content these days. Social
Well,
media.
it's a lot of work to build really really good content. As I think every creator knows, or every teacher knows, it takes an enormous amount of work to build really engaging, high quality content, and that's true in general. But it's definitely true for educational content as well. And
Definitely.
so, unfortunately, you're right. Like, I haven't been creating any courses for a very long time.
Yeah, it's just I think with the emergence of social media, I'm curious, how did you see that as a potential threat? Because there's so many courses online out there for free, and people are inclined to pay less and less when they can find it for free. How do you think DataCamp is?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Um, so the way we've always thought about our kind of positioning is, like, when we started, you had really good educational platforms that were already there, like Coursera, Udemy, and a few others, and so they had high quality videos, and they still do, right? With typically high quality instructors. Um, Now some of that actually has moved to YouTube. You have some high quality videos from high quality instructors, that are indeed available for free. Um, and so that has its place and its value for sure. Um, there is a discovery and a search cost, because there's also a lot of content out there that's not that high quality and that's not great. So there's definitely kind of a research and a discovery cost, even if there's not a dollar cost associated to that. But the way we thought about our differentiation was that, um, at the end of the day, most people learn by doing, right? And so we wanted to build a platform that was very engaging, and where people would actually use our Python, SQL, Snowflake, Databricks, um, and so on and so on, Power BI, Tableau, uh, and 70-80% of the time they would actively learn, they would actively solve challenges, and as they were learning, they would be hands on the keywords, using the technology in an active way, and they get feedback when they get something right. They move to the next stage. They get feedback when they get something wrong, and that's where AI enables us to get better and better at personalization. Um, but the whole premise was, like, at the end of the day, people learn by doing, and it's very hard for most people to sit through hours and hours of videos and stay engaged, and stay motivated. And so, to some extent, you're also solving for that motivation, in
Hmm.
online education, and active learning that's slightly gamified, I think, is a solution. Um, so yeah, I see us as a differentiated enough, as long as we charge an affordable price, that the enhanced experience, the kind of quality control we do, the fact that there's clear learning paths, clear curation, that there's a superior learning experience. I do think um, that's worth $20 or $30 a month, or even less if you pay yearly. Yeah, so I don't. It's somewhat competitive, but I don't think per se it is directly competitive. And even our
Mhm.
initial pitch was like, "Hey, Coursera, Udemy, it's great content, great platforms, great instructors." But the reality is, almost nobody finishes these courses. It's like
Mhm.
5-10%, and it's just hard for people to stay engaged and motivated um, through like 8, 12, 100 hours of video content. It's hard. Some people can do it, and it's great. But most
Interesting.
people actually learn by doing, and yeah, stay motivated more easily when it's active learning.
Interesting. So you have to take into account the psychology of just learning and just psychology of people, because especially like these days, I feel like there is more and more emergence of like ADHD symptoms, and how people, because of social media partly too, we had tend to just skip a lot of the things that we do not like or scroll through. I'm a victim to that too. But I think that's why platforms like DataCamp can really change the education when it comes to attaining those skills, especially technical skills. So I'm curious how you mentioned earlier that you'll try to focus on scalability of learning. I guess when you mentioned that corporate training. So how what did you mean by that?
Yeah. So in general, our two kind of parts of our vision from an educational or a didactical point of view have always been people tend to learn by doing, right? If you go back all the way to the Middle Ages, you had the apprenticeship model, and that's a very effective way to learn. It's a more motivating way to learn as well. So that's
Mm,
always been one of our pillars. We want to make it super easy to do that, right? So you just come to the website, you immediately get your own Python session. You don't have to worry about installation or any of that kind of stuff. And now we're doing the same thing with newer technologies. So you can go to DataCamp and use Databricks or Snowflake or Power BI or Tableau or Alteryx, like right in the browser. You don't have to worry about anything. You can start learning by doing immediately. Um, so that's kind of one pillar of the didactical experience, and that requires us to build a platform that's very scalable and that enables that at scale. The other pillar is uh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. um,
no worries.
so the first pillar is learning by doing. The second pillar is um, the fact that people learn best when they have kind of a private tutor. There's been a ton of research around this, and
Mm,
private tutoring is great, but and that's what we did. Martin and myself, we kind of started a nonprofit to match people, um, but it's very expensive and it's very hard to scale. And so our vision from day one, even before you had like this whole kind of capability in Gen AI, was we want to build kind of an experience where it is almost like you have a private tutor helping you along the way, giving you feedback on what you're doing well, what you're not doing well. And so we build a lot of technology to enable that. As people solve challenges, they can, well, we auto grade, so we check kind of what they're doing. Did it make sense? Did it not make sense? And we give them a thumbs up when they're doing well, and we're trying to give them really personalized feedback when they get it wrong, helping them understand the mistake they make. And so we build a whole set of technologies around that for Python, for SQL, and so on. Now with Gen AI, we kind of are slightly testing, but we can definitely take that to the next level. And I feel like we can finally achieve that original mission of like, hey, everybody should have a private tutor while they're learning by doing, because that's kind of the ultimate educational model in my mind.
interesting.
That's but all of that to say, like for that to be affordable, it needs to be really scalable,
Mhm.
and so our mission is to bring that to as many people as possible. Where we charge some money to individuals and organizations, and we do have a philanthropic arm to the business as well that's helping nonprofits and educational institutions through free licensing uh, with certain conditions, of course, but basically kind of as a way to help people who can't necessarily afford the price of a subscription.
That's awesome. Yes, now that you mentioned about Gen AI, I was curious how DataCamp has been around for a long time now, over a decade. I'm not sure exactly how many years, but
It depends on when you start counting. I think our U.S. entity. So when we started the U.S. business, I think it's now around 10 years, and the Belgian entity is a little over 10 years, indeed.
oh, okay. Oh wow.
Yeah. The,
Yes. So I was curious since you guys been through a lot in the market changes and especially recently, how did the the emergence of Gen AI of just when ChatGPT came out change your customer base maybe even, or did the COVID also impact the more of a larger adoption of DataCamp because now people are at home and they have free time to learn? Or what do you think? Do you think you saw like a growth because of those two factors? Because I haven't seen much of DataCamp's content before. I usually was exposed to like Code Academy, but recently over the past 2 years, I've seen a lot of courses and a lot of content, and I was curious where does it come from?
um, yeah. So maybe to take those, I think there's two parts, right? Like what happened during COVID, and then what happened since Gen AI.
Yes.
Um, so so COVID was kind of crazy because suddenly everybody's locked down or asked to kind of stay home. Um, and what was really fascinating is initially we saw a huge spike.
Hmm.
Our kind of engagement on the platform went through the roof. We also saw way more people come to DataCamp than ever before. Um, and and then as the lockdowns kind of progressed, there was a little bit of a leveling off. So you kind of had this huge peak, and then it didn't go all the way back down, but it did kind of come down a little bit. So I think some of that is like people were asked to be home. They were scared about losing their job. They really wanted to invest in themselves. Um, and I think as time progressed, maybe they got less less
Yeah.
motivated.
Yeah.
Um, and there was a little bit less of an incentive. Um, so COVID had a positive impact. One of the things we really liked seeing is we did some research in collaboration with um, a researcher who looked at, did the COVID effect, was the COVID effect bigger depending on kind of how rich people are in a certain zip code. And what's really interesting is like you actually saw an effect where there was more of a spike in interest in the less rich areas of the US. So kind of confirming that like, hey, online education can actually kind of um, uh, drive more opportunities for people from all types of backgrounds. So that was really exciting to see. Now to switch to Gen AI part of the answer. Um, Gen AI definitely had a very positive impact in many ways. So the first way is we were already kind of telling the story that, hey, data skills are important not just for data scientists and data analysts, but really for people in all types of roles, whether you're in marketing, in finance, in operations. If you have really good data skills and analytic skills, you're going to get ahead much faster because a lot of organizations just don't have enough people with that skill set. And so it's really highly valuable. That was already the story we were kind of preaching to the world, if you will. And I think when people saw the magic of ChatGPT and some of the subsequent models, I think that clicked somehow more for way more people. Right, both kind of individuals thinking, oh, maybe I should invest in my data and AI skills because this does seem to be the future. And also at the top of organizations, I think there was suddenly a heightened awareness around data and AI literacy is going to be so essential for the future. We had one of our clients where they literally saw in a few weeks or a few months' time, I think 30-40% of the workforce, and this is an organization with tens of thousands of people, um, started using ChatGPT, and they came to us and they're like, we have no idea what people are doing, and if they understand the risks and if they understand how to use these
Mm,
tools. And so we rolled out some very large programs at some of these organizations to help them understand how to build data and AI literacy skills with their workforce. So that was kind of the first initial boost, and that hasn't gone away. In contrast to COVID, where it was to some extent a temporary effect, um, that dynamic is not going away. Maybe we're kind of a little bit over the peak in the hype cycle,
mm.
but it's a real trend, right? And it's not. If anything, 5 years from now, it's going to be even more true than it is today. That data and AI skills and data and AI literacy is essential. Um,
Interesting.
so I
Yeah.
think it really increased awareness, and we then leaned into it quite heavily as well. So we really started to create a lot of like curriculum that was already planned, but it got accelerated in many areas, um, as well as media content. So we started doing more blogs and podcasts, and we really kind of invested in increasing awareness around those topics, and also increasing awareness around DataCamp at the same time.
I
Um,
see. And I guess you also implemented some of the Gen AI functionality inside the platform as well, and not just in the curriculum. Can you talk more about that?
yeah, so that's actually the third element of kind of your awareness increase, and then the last element is Gen AI enables us to build even better educational experiences,
Mm,
um, and there's a lot of really small features that we've already added that do drive like a lot of satisfaction, and even though they seem small, the impact on the learner is actually quite large. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Like one small feature is the error explanation. Right, when you start learning Python, R, SQL, or any type of technology, quite often, especially for non-technical people, when they see error messages, it kind of they freeze. Right, it scares people and they don't know what to do. Um, but these error messages are very structured, especially if you give the Gen AI model some context. Um, those models are really good at explaining those errors, right? And so we added a small feature just saying, hey, if you want to understand this error, just click here. That's been used millions of times in the platform, and people really love that feature. Even though it's a very minor one, it didn't take that much time to implement. Another example is what a lot of teachers do is they kind of recap. This is what we did in our last course. This is what you last learned. Or a lot of students, even if you're learning by yourself, that's what you'll do before you start. You kind of review what you did last time. Um, and and so we have a learner refresh or recap. I'm not sure what we called it, but where when you come back to the platform and you haven't been there in a while, we'll tell you like, hey, this is what you learned last time, and
mm.
it kind of synthesizes and summarizes what the learner um, uh,
Interesting.
did last time, and uh, and it's a small feature, but I think it's really valuable for a lot of people, and it leverages the areas that Gen AI is already exceptionally good at, summarizing and synthesizing in a
Hmm.
pretty effective way. So that's kind of step one, was let's get all the quick wins. Let's build a lot of small features that drive a lot of value for the learner almost immediately. In parallel, we're also working on kind of the real long term vision is still you kind of go through a learning by doing experience, and you have your private tutor on the side. Um, and we some of that is live, the kind of early versions of that tutor within the platform. So we have an assistant that will help you figure out like where to start in the curriculum, what courses to take, and so on. um, But then the real holy grail in my mind is that you have that private tutor while you're learning. And we'll launch some experiences later this year that really take advantage of that. Um, there's been a lot of hype around that, and I think the hype is warranted in the sense that long term this will be huge. This will be a huge improvement to the education kind of space and technology space. However, it's really easy to make great demos of like private tutors being awesome. It's not that easy to yet to build like really reliable, consistent experiences. And so I think the hype is a little bit ahead of the reality, but it's going to happen, and we're investing quite heavily to make sure we're one of the leaders in leveraging Gen AI in those types of ways to build really superior learning experiences.
That's amazing. I mean, I am a witness of that too. Like, I think every month I see a new feature released, and there's like, I haven't seen any other educational platform that develops that much content and includes that many features from Gen AI. So, how do you guys are able to just adapt so quickly?
Oh, first of all, I appreciate you saying that, because once when you're on the inside, it always feels like you're not going fast enough. Um, I think honestly, kudos to the team here. I think we built a really strong team with the right skill set, and I think because DataCamp is educating in the area of data and AI, I think we have a little bit of an unfair advantage
Mm,
in leveraging those technologies now to make the learning experience better as well, because there's just a lot of people in the company that actually understand these things
mm,
and what's possible, and we're teaching that. So I think we have an unfair advantage in applying that to ourselves as well. um,
interesting.
that doesn't mean it come natural. Like, there's a lot of people, really talented people on the team, working really hard to make it happen. But I do think it compared to other education providers, I think we have a bit of an edge there, where some of our competitors or companies that are adjacent, they don't necessarily have a lot of talent that has an understanding of data and AI, right?
Hmm. Definitely.
I think that's, yeah, we that's an advantage we have, and we have to make sure we don't squander it. Um, so
Interesting. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But do you guys make a deliberate effort to like training maybe? Or I know you are a proponent of data literacy. Do you guys practice that within the company as well? And how does it look like?
that's a that's a great question. Um, so the honest answer, I feel like we're probably not doing that enough. But it, so if you join one of our commercial teams, you will go through quite an extensive training and certification process. Um, and obviously, we use DataCamp internally as well to educate
Mm,
new employees in a lot of these areas. Um, and then I think in our product and engineering teams, we naturally have attracted, so we don't have like a lot of formal training there, but I think we naturally attract people who are really curious and interested
mm,
in data and AI. And obviously on the content side, so the people that are building our curriculum, those tend to be the experts in these domains, and
mm,
so they're selected to be true experts. Um, so so yes and no, I guess, is the answer. I think we have on our commercial teams, we have very formal training processes. On our technical teams, we don't, but it's because so far we felt like we don't need it, and we kind of naturally attract people with strong data and AI literacies and data and AI skills.
mm. And what does data literacy looks like to you? I know you talk about it a lot, but I'm just curious to know what do you think every company needs to focus on when it comes to training on data literacy?
Yeah, so like it's typically defined as like the ability to work, reason, think through problems with data, um, and I th- so I think that's still kind of the baseline, that many organizations only have to some extent. Um, what I've shifted my focus on thinking through is really the next step, which is AI literacy.
Hmm.
Right? There's now a need for people to understand how to work with
Prompt.
some of these new models, like things like prompt engineering, to understand kind of what the constraints are, what the ethical risks are. In some companies, we're like what the compliance risks are. Right? The EU um, likes to regulate and likes to put a lot of rules in place. That's what we do in Europe, and so but that means that especially within larger organizations, you do need a certain level of training for almost everyone in the organization to understand kind of what are the rules and what are the constraints and what can we do, what should we do, what should we not do. And I think we're at the very beginning of that kind of transition, and I would imagine that just like you have security training, security awareness type training,
Hmm.
that that is almost mandatory in every company. I could imagine a version of that for kind of AI literacy as well,
Hmm.
because there are some real risks and some real opportunities with some of these new technologies. And then maybe 10, 20 years from now is just kind of so ingrained that that is no longer necessary. But I could see
Hmm.
it being a requirement for a lot of organizations in the next 3 to 5 years.
Hmm. Interesting. Now that we're talking about the future, what are your thoughts on education in general when it comes to data and AI, and even beyond that? How do you think the future looks like for DataCamp and outside?
Yes, I'm really excited about how AI is going to give the citizen data scientists superpowers. Right? Like there's this term, the citizen data scientists, kind of referring to people with really good data skills that are not formally data scientists. Usually, maybe they're in marketing or finance or
Interesting.
operations. Um, and I think there was already a trend of kind of uh, both individuals kind of signing up to say, hey, I'm going to invest in my skill set, but I'm not necessarily going to be a data scientist. I'm just going to be
Hmm.
the person within the marketing team or the finance team
Hmm.
or the HR team who really understands how to leverage data. I think AI will create more of these people and give them kind of a superpower. Um, like I do believe that it will still be very relevant to have SQL and Python and those really technical skills. But at the same time, it's going to become easier to do certain things as a less technical user. If you're one of the early adopters of tools like Copilots or um,
Hmm.
DataCamp has launched a product called Data Lab, which is somewhat like Google Colab, but tries to make it even easier to get started and really leverage AI to generate code and generate visualizations and so on. Um, and so I think tools like that are going to give these citizen data scientists superpowers, um, and actually drive a need for training as well. Because if you get superpowers, um, it's how you use them that determines the outcome.
Interesting. I never heard such a term citizen AI. You said, or
Citizen data scientist
citizen
is
data
kind of
scientist.
a term that people have started using to refer to people with good data skills, but are not in what are traditionally considered data roles. Um,
Hmm.
and that's a big trend within a lot of organizations. So they may be called marketing analysts, operations analysts, financial analysts, or head of pricing or head of monetization. Like you could be in all types of roles where you end up working with a lot of data where you can make a difference by just having superior data skills.
Interesting. I think that's a great way for anyone to enter this field because if there are many people like, especially as you said recently with the release of ChatGPT, knowing that the skill is not going anywhere, and people who are upskilling, and as you said, I think from one of your other podcasts, reskilling, that I took the quote out on the post that I made about this, that everyone has to upskill. You said reskill, and it's going to be fun. I really like that quote, and I guess it applies to everyone now, given that citizen data scientists should be in almost every department of any company. It seems like.
Yes, yes, yeah. And I think the companies that are ahead of the curve, they have already realized that, and they already are investing in people that way, and they're also taking that into account in hiring.
Hmm.
Um, like one of, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say which one, but one of the companies we work with is really in the kind of media and marketing space, and um, and they've decided in their recruiting process that data skills for their marketing roles is now going to be a requirement. And so,
Wow.
so they kind of have a dual approach where, on the one hand, they're investing heavily in their existing employee base to kind of up level them, but at the same time, they're really using it as a filter um, for their new grads that are right out of school, but where they do have a filter on data skills.
Interesting. It's almost like sounds like there's a lot more work these days for newly grads to get a job than it used to be before. I know there's like lots of memes going on where before you used to just bring your resume and say that you're a good learner and you'll get a job. But these days it's just a lot of requirements for entry level positions.
Yeah, I think in general it's definitely a tougher market right now than a few years ago, especially in the tech sector. There's
Hmm.
some other industries that are less affected, but in tech, I think it's definitely harder.
Hmm.
And we see it in our numbers as well. If we open a position, I think we get 5 to 10 times more applicants than a few years ago. And
Oh
that's not only
wow.
because DataCamp grew. I think that's really just the market speaking. Um, so
Wow.
yeah, it's very noticeable.
I
And
see.
so if your audience is looking for a job, I think it's important to really think through how can you stand out in the crowd, because some of
So
these roles get hundreds of applications, and so the trick is to find a way to get through that initial filter.
exactly. I think that's the hardest part, actually, just getting a callback for an interview. And I was going to ask, from your just experience in running the company, what do you think can help people that are trying to transition to data to stand out?
Yeah, my main piece of advice would be don't underestimate the value of building out a portfolio. Having a very strong portfolio where you show what you're capable of, you show what you're passionate about, you show that you you not only have the technical skills, but you actually have an ability to analyze a problem and then tell a story. I think that is probably the best way to stand out. Um, and uh, yeah, like you can do it in many different ways. We try to make that easy if you're a DataCamp user to build out your profile on DataCamp, but there's really no wrong way. I think that the most important thing is to build really interesting projects where you demonstrate what you're capable of. Um, then you can get certifications, or right, like you can get a traditional master's degree, which is a form of a certification, but I wouldn't underestimate some of the other types of certifications that are out there. If some roles require you to have experience or a base level of skills in certain technologies, Power BI, Tableau, Alteryx, and getting those certificates is a simple but effective way to demonstrate that you actually have those skills. And then yeah, that's true for other technologies like SQL and Python as well. And I don't want to make this too much of a sales pitch, but like DataCamp tries to support both of these use cases where if you want to get a certification from Microsoft or one of these vendors, we offer learning paths to get you there. Um, but then we also see some gaps in the market where we've created our own certifications.
Hmm.
Um,
Like,
but yeah, building a portfolio and getting the right type of certifications, I think, really helps. And then there's a question of like how do you go about reaching out to the company, and making sure that you're not just dumping resumes through LinkedIn, um, but also trying to connect to the right people, and really building a network, going to events. Um, I wouldn't underestimate that, because the reality is, like, even if you do the right things and you have the right profile, um, depending on the organization, you can be one resume in hundreds of resumes. And so there's got to be automated filters that have a lot of false negatives, essentially. um, and yeah, so like the way around that is to make sure it's not just that flow that you're a part of, you're also part of other flows.
hmm, I love that. Yes, I think that's, I totally agree. Building a portfolio and knowing how to tell a story is a fundamental skill if you're trying to break into data. But I'm curious also, since you work with a lot of corporations, you must know some market insights on what industries are actually hiring the most, or which sectors you think are impacted the most with AI development, and that way need a lot more workforce that people can target, like even domains, maybe healthcare, automotive, um, anything that you
Yeah,
see.
that's a really good question. I have to think about that. I think in general, the the space that we're part of, like SaaS technology, has been hit pretty hard. Um,
Mm,
um, so a lot of those companies have shifted focus to efficiency and really trimmed down their hiring.
mm,
Um, it's some of the more traditional sectors, that are less cyclical or counter cyclical, I think,
mm,
where there still are like really good opportunities. So think about energy sector,
mm.
especially kind of new types of energy. That's probably a sector where that's much less affected. Um, but I think the other angle to think about it is, I think the type of roles people might apply to could change to. So for someone who ultimately wants a role as a data analyst, um, there's definitely been a huge drop in kind of recruiting for junior data analysts in the last few years.
Mm.
I'm convinced that's just the cyclical nature of things, um, and that's a temporary swing. Um, and so one way to go around that is, well, maybe you're struggling to find that role, but you can you can get a role as a financial analyst or a marketing analyst, where you can be the hero whose data skills are like incredible. And that could actually be a way to accelerate your career, and you can still make the jump into like a formal data role.
Mm,
That's one angle I would consider and think through. Um,
mm,
because depending on the sector or the location, like it is just a tough market for specific roles, and especially for some more junior roles. um, so that's another kind of angle and way to think through it.
interesting. Yes, I love that you mentioning that, because I think in the beginning of your career, you definitely need to focus on your hard skills, and later on, you can double down on just the domain expertise because you simply have more of that with time. But yes, definitely standing out with your SQL and Python skills is the way to go.
Yes.
Um, That's great. So I guess this is my last question, and later on we will see if anyone has questions in the Q&A chat. So prepare your questions there. Feel free to ask them now, whoever is on the live. But looking ahead in the future, what are the other some? I know we talked about Gen AI, but do you see any other exciting developments in data in general? And how do you think that's going to shape the industry, like even within 2, 3, or 5 years?
Yes. A great question, and really interesting. to think through that. Um, so I think if you think about it from the skills perspective, because that's probably what people are most interested in. The first thing I would say is that um, don't underestimate kind of the intersection between technical skills and that's true regardless of how the technology evolves. So things like data storytelling, data visualization, and the ability to break down kind of a business problem. I think those skills they're they're sort of data skills, but not really. And those skills are really important because they will you will need them regardless of exactly how the space evolves. Um,
Hmm.
and the second piece of advice I would have is for people to really embrace Gen AI and a lot of the new tooling that's available. All right, there's an opportunity, especially for new people, to skip a step and immediately start learning how to write code, for example, with Copilot or with Data
Hmm.
Lab, or where you're really kind of learning from the start to do certain things in a really effective and efficient way.
Hmm.
Um, I personally really believe that the need for like deeper technical expertise is not going to go away, and it's going to remain really important. If anything, probably more important than today. Um, and yeah, those are my high level pieces of advice on the skill sets in the next few years.
Hmm.
Anything at the intersection of cloud and AI, I think will continue to grow quite significantly as well, because we're at the very beginning of those things like Amazon Bedrock and kind of like the at the intersection of the software engineering and the data space and the cloud space. I think there's all types of new tooling and new skill sets that are emerging that are very much at the very beginning. And Yeah, if you're jumping on that and you really understand how to work with Bytecode and how to work with tools like Bedrock, or how to really leverage some of OpenAI stuff, I think that's going to give you a massive edge in the um, in any type of job search or career path.
Interesting. I guess it makes sense because it's also relatively new and there aren't that many experts in the field. So it will be a great way to enter the market.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's kind of crazy. Like some of the so our speaking from DataCamp's perspective, our approach has always been like we go to the absolute experts and we leverage the true experts in different domains to build our curriculum and to teach our courses. But there are now some of these areas that are so new, like
Yeah.
to some extent there are no experts yet, right? And like everybody's kind of learning at the same time. Obviously, if you have a background in kind of related fields and adjacent things, it really helps. Um, but yeah, a lot of this is really new, and so there are no true experts on how to use Gen AI in marketing. Like that's new
Mhm.
for everyone.
I love
Um,
that. Yes, that's why it's kind of exciting for many of us who are entering data science
yeah,
or just the workforce in general.
yeah, I think that's a huge opportunity. You don't get that many of these big shifts in your career, and so I would uh, really encourage everyone to take advantage of that.
Definitely. So, whoever is listening, make sure that you know how to learn fast and adopt to these new technologies. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about how the speed of your learning and adapting. So, that can definitely differentiate. So, I think I would like to summarize what you said for the people that are listening. If you want to succeed in the next few years, first, you need to understand the business acumen and get the sense of product and the users, have the empathy for them. Correct me if I got it wrong, but so far that was the take. And then the second one is adapt and build those skills that just emerging that are in demand in the industry. So yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward, and I think less. I know there's lots of like imposter syndrome for people who are trying to break into the field just because of the technical demands and the requirements that we have. But I think it should be less scary for
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah. Maybe just to react to the imposter syndrome and the scariness. I just want to say, like, this is actually one of the things that we've learned building DataCamp is that so many people do not learn because they think they can do it. And
Mm,
so a huge part of our focus has been, let's make it really kind of approachable and easy and engaging and fun to learn. Um, because to some extent, like, people's blockers are kind of mental blockers where
yeah,
they just think
definitely.
it's not for them, think they can't do it. And the reality is, like, most people can do it. And it's about just believing in yourself and getting it done.
Oh,
Um,
I love that.
no, but that's really, it's a huge part of, I think, what makes a good training program and effective education is helping people to get to the other side of that.
Interesting. Maybe companies should invest in that type of training for like mental health and mental performance too.
Yes, I'm far from an expert on that, but what I can tell you is, like, because we literally, I'm a data nerd, so I'm going to answer this question from a data perspective. Like, if we introduce a challenge early on in a course, that's quite hard.
Hmm.
We see an effect where, like, we might lose 10-20% of the learners and they'll never come back, almost never. And if we
Hmm.
just remove that harder challenge and we make sure the build is kind of gradual, those people actually get there, and sometimes they get certified to get a job. So, like, it's really the kind of psychological effect of that triggers them thinking I can't do it, and
Wow.
that makes them quit. So
Wow.
it's really interesting, those to kind of see that what you kind of might intuitively feel and believe, to see that reflected in data is really fascinating.
Interesting. Now that you say that, I remember myself early on that whenever I would start, I think there's one particular project that I started that I quit and I felt horrible. It was just when I was trying to set up my Whoop analysis. I have a tracker for my fitness health, and I tried to set up my own website, just getting the data from it using two auth to authorization, and that was such a headache. And I ultimately had to give up, and I think my confidence in developing backend just dropped. But I think it's all about building that confidence, as you say, especially from
Exactly.
early on.
That's a huge part of why kind of this more gamified learning by doing approach works is it helps people build confidence that they can actually do this. Um,
I love that. Yeah. No, I truly enjoyed our session, Jonathan. Why don't we
Likewise.
go ahead and open up for some questions? Guys, if you're still watching here, let's go ahead and go over your questions. So I think we have a few of them. Shannon is asking, what skills are you seeing that are simultaneously most in demand and hard for business to find currently? That's an interesting question.
That's a really good question indeed. Um, so something that's been brewing for a while, that's still very much true, is that a lot of companies are struggling kind of one layer below the data science and the data analytics. You have the data engineering side, and that's actually a massive bottleneck in a lot of organizations. Um, and what tends to happen is you get people with a software engineering background that kind of on the job learn the data side of things. But I think there's a big opportunity for people who have more of a business background to go into data engineering as well.
Mm,
Obviously, if that's your thing, and or for software engineers to really invest in acquiring those data skills, and those people are really valuable in the marketplace right now.
mm,
Um, that's a trend, but it's not a completely new trend. Um, I think the with the changes in Gen AI, um, the jury's still out what the biggest where the biggest opportunities are going to be, in my opinion. Um, Internally within DataCamp, we see the most kind of additional value probably in our content creation, whether that's course creation or there's a lot of or marketing copy or things like that. There's a lot of efficiencies to be gained. Um, but I'm not sure whether that's going to be the biggest gap. So I'm not sure about how Gen AI is going to change that. To be
Mm.
honest.
I think it was the general question, not necessarily around Gen AI, but I do agree with you on data engineering part. I feel like a couple of years ago, the companies wanted data scientists, and then they got the data scientist and realized that they actually need data engineers because they don't have for data scientists to work with. So that makes total sense.
Yeah, and there's so much messiness that organization build up over the years that I don't think that's going to go away. Because the more demand there is, I think this is kind of the dynamic that happens, right? Like there's what's very visible is, oh, Gen AI allows more people to interact with data. Amazing. There's going to be investments against that.
Mhm.
There's a lot of value you can get from employing analytics teams and data science teams. But then the bottleneck tends to become the data engineering side, which is kind of less visible, but is the absolute kind of foundation of a really good data strategy. And there tend to be the biggest gaps there from a kind of supply demand perspective in the employment market. At least that's kind of the trend that we've seen and that we've heard from a lot of our clients.
I think it makes total sense because most of the data and internet is still unstructured and messy, as you said. So we're all trying to figure out how to make the use of it.
Yeah, and actually, maybe if I were to guess, and take this with a grain of salt, but if I were to guess about an kind of an intersection where that might happen as well, is I think the kind of everything at the intersection between software, AI, and cloud I'm expecting that there's going to be big gaps in the labor market there
Hmm.
as well.
What do you mean by
Um,
that? What are the?
so, who are the people who are kind of developing AI models within organizations, setting them up in the cloud, making sure
Mm,
there's no model drift and so on, and who are the product managers that understand this stuff well enough that they can actually do that.
mm,
Um, I think for people with the less technical background, there's actually a huge opportunity because
mm,
most software engineers, their whole training and their way of thinking is very deterministic.
mm,
Um, and um, to write really good prompts and build really good AI systems, you tend to benefit from some domain expertise and some non-deterministic thinking as well. And so I think ideally those types of systems are not just built by software engineers, but they're built by kind of product managers, domain experts. And my guess is that like
machine
for
learning engineers.
product managers, domain experts, there's gonna be a huge gap of people who actually have that type of domain expertise,
Mm-hmm.
as well as understand enough about the AI models to be
Mm,
helpful and part of those types of teams. Does that make
mm.
sense?
Yeah. Do you think that those roles would be called like MLOps um, engineers or machine learning engineers?
Uh, yes, that's part of it. I could see new roles emerging as well around kind of like AI product manager. Like I'm not sure what they're going to be called, but
Hmm.
um,
No, that makes sense.
yeah,
AI product
I feel
management.
like MLOps is the really technical side of that.
Yeah.
My gut instinct is like I think there's going to be a huge skills gap in the 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 people on the business side that they collaborate with, their stakeholders, their kind of product managers that they work with. That's where I think there's going to be a massive gap for
Hmm.
some time.
Interesting.
Um,
No, I haven't thought about that. I thought it's fairly easy to understand to for product managers to upscale and understand the AI and become AI product managers. But if anyone's trying to break into AI field, I think that makes sense because there's less technical requirement when it comes to just learning some of the machine learning fundamentals, and yet you can still be in that space.
mhm.
Interesting. That's awesome. Thank you for that question, Shannon. Let's see what we have else. So Sharva is asking, with so much hype around AI, it can be challenging to separate realistic expectations from exaggerated claims. How do you approach staying informed and grounded in your understanding of what AI can realistically achieve?
Um, yeah, first of all, I agree with the call out. Like, there is a lot of hype around AI, and there are some people who have a strong incentive to set um, unrealistic expectations because um, they sell the machines, and or they're kind of in a way in a battle with other large players, so they have to buy the machines. And so there's definitely a bit of a dynamic where some of the key players like Nvidia, OpenAI, they have a massive incentive to kind of make exaggerated claims, and then the media has a massive incentive to make exaggerated claims as well, because that's how they get clicks and debate.
Mhm.
And so it's helpful to, even though I'm a believer, I think GenAI is a huge shift. It's going to have massive impact. Don't get me wrong. I also want to acknowledge, like, there is a series of incentives that will lead to exaggerated claims. How to stay grounded? I think when you think about it from a jobs perspective, um, I would track, like, what are the skills that are starting to take off, and that you actually see in job specs, right? Where it's not just kind of like somebody claiming it, like me on a podcast, but where you actually see, and even if you see like just a few companies, as long as you can reasonably expect there to be growth, I think those are real trends in all likelihood. There are some new technologies that are where there's not going to be that many roles yet, but that it's fairly clear, like, hey, those are the technologies of the future, and the building blocks um, for this kind of revolution in AI. That's one piece of advice for job searches, but I think the general version of what I'm saying is, um, look at the actual data in addition to kind of the vision of people, which is I think relevant in the context of this type of podcast. And that's what we tend to do as well, right? Because there's all these articles saying, oh, you're not gonna need Python and this and that anymore, but like, we just look at the data, and the data is often saying the exact opposite. And that's a way to stay grounded. Try to look at the trends, and the actual data in kind of the job specs.
Hmm. Love that. Yes, I would also add, if you're trying to break into data science, reading research papers helps a lot by when you want to differentiate what actually matters and what doesn't. Because, I mean, even with the research, though, we have so many papers that are coming out every single week, and I know it's hard to come up with it. But then again, Gen AI can help you understand those too and summarize. That's what I usually do. But yeah, stay in touch both in industry and academia. And let's go ahead and answer our last question. I know we've been here for almost 90 minutes, which I appreciate
Yeah.
a lot. Let's see what Char was asking. Which industries do you believe are currently underutilizing AI and data science?
Huh. That's
Interesting.
that's a great question. Again, um, I think the cop out answer is all of them. So, which I really believe. I think right now every industry is still underutilizing AI and data science, and you'll see a tremendous level of growth within every industry. And actually, just speaking, I'm not just making that up. Like, if you look at DataCamp's client base, um, we are getting new clients. We see clients grow in almost every industry. Um, so then the question is, like, what industry is that more true for some industries than others? Um, that's a really tricky one. Um,
I think probably heavily regulated companies might have, or like government companies, I mean, government sector might underutilize AI and data science just because people do not know what to expect out of Gen AI, at least. for
Yeah.
now.
At the same time, I can tell you that there's a lot of government institutions that are actually investing quite a lot in upskilling and reskilling
Hmm.
for their employees, like government is actually one of the top segments for DataCamp in our B2B business, um,
Whoa.
which some people, yeah. So like if you just, I can answer the question of like what are we seeing? We're seeing government, consulting, financial institutions, healthcare. Those are probably kind of the top sectors. Um, but that being said, like we almost every industry vertical will have some clients there.
Hmm.
Um, but I think you're right. I think probably the ones where there's the most risk of underutilization are the ones that are highly regulated. And then if you think about where that might have the most impact on kind of us as a society, my money would be on kind of healthcare being very high up there, um,
Hmm.
and maybe transportation ultimately as well.
Hmm.
Because
Interesting.
we can probably save a lot of lives in the next 10 years if AIs are driving rather than humans. But I think the biggest kind of bottleneck on that will probably be regulation.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting. Yes, just living in San Francisco and seeing how much money we're investing in automated driving, it's and not getting results. I feel like we're pouring a lot of money into those two sectors, actually, healthcare, AI in healthcare, and AI in autonomous driving, and yet we're far from seeing the results yet, just yet.
yeah, yeah. So you're actually right. Like there's definitely investment and there's a lot of utilization. It's more uh, how
Adoption.
long will it take to actually see the impact?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm very biased, but I think one of the areas where you'll see the fastest impact, I actually think, is education. Um,
Hmm.
I think the sector, like the tech sector, where that seems to be first in driving a ton of value is customer support, where some of these the application of Gen AI already is driving an enormous amount of additional value. But I do think education will be one of the next sectors to
Hmm.
have massive impact.
Interesting. I'm honestly really excited for DataCamp's future. It looks like you guys are on the right track with the right pace. So I hope you guys are going to shed the light for everyone else in the education space on how to adapt to these changes. So I'm
Yeah.
thankful for your time.
No, thank you
And
so much.
yeah, I truly enjoyed our conversation. And I think this was the perfect first podcast of the Technical Founder. And thank you for coming today.
No, thanks for inviting me. Have a great rest of the day.
Awesome. You too. Have a great weekend, Joan.